All right, I'm gonna swap over. Hey everybody, welcome back to Dorm Squad Sports, a college sports podcast focused on Alabama athletics. As always, I'm Dakota. This should be the last time that I'm without Brian and Oakley. We're all going to be starting classes on Wednesday, but Oakley's at the dorm. Me and Brian are still at home, but we're all obviously going to put something out for this big national championship game that's coming up today. And we're going to talk about some X factors here. We're going to talk about what needs to happen for Alabama. We're also probably going to mention, of course, the big day. I'm actually recording this the day before the championship game. And, of course, recently Alabama upset Kentucky, so that was a huge win last night. And I'm going to be talking about all of those things. But before I do any of that, if you could do me a favor, if you're listening on YouTube, if you could subscribe and like there and leave comments. And if you are listening on Apple Podcasts or Podbean, make sure you subscribe there. Leave a 5-star iTunes rating. We're going to ask questions throughout the podcast and answer those questions in your iTunes review. Just do something and make sure you keep in touch with us. And if you haven't yet, make sure you follow us on Twitter. That's a great game day follow because we're live tweeting the entire game. It's a fun thing to be a part of. So make sure you join us there. But anyway, we're going to focus on this huge game, of course, Clemson, Alabama. We all kind of expected it from the beginning of the year, but we're finally here. And I'm going to talk about some X factors for the game. The first X factor I got is the fact that we don't really know how their quarterback, Trevor Lawrence, is going to handle the biggest game of his life. There's a stat where the only teams who have had an experienced quarterback every time they win, for example, like uh, I'm wording it wrong, but when Alabama won this last year, we had an experienced quarterback, and the year before when Clemson won, they had the experienced quarterback. Anytime an experienced quarterback has played in a rematch or going back to the national championship game, they win. It's really hard for a guy who doesn't have that experience to win. Of course, Tua did what he did last year, but we got there because of Jalen Hurts. And the year before that, Sean Watson had that bad taste in his mouth from the losing the championship the year before. But I think it's going to be really huge to see if he can make a few plays early and kind of get settled down. It's going to be a little bit tougher. But if we can get in his head, get an early sack like we did against Kyler Murray and start out strong, that's going to be huge for us. So we really need to, if you're an Alabama fan, you need to be watching to make sure that we're doing the right things to keep him in his head a little bit. And hopefully the stage will get to him a little bit more. Of course, he has plenty of talent around him. He doesn't have to win the game by himself, but he definitely has to have a really good game. And that's going to be a big turning point that we'll be able to see early on. Another thing, their defensive line versus our offensive line. Of course, the battle in trenches on both sides is going to be really tough. But the biggest thing is with Dexter Lawrence being out for Clemson, they are going to be really, I wouldn't say stretched thin because they're probably one of the deepest D-line cores in the country. But what he does is he allows people to have to double team him, which lets guys like Christian Wilkins, Austin Bryant, Cleveland Ferrell, lets them have single matchups, and then they get off their blocks and they win those matchups. But the fact that we don't have to double team his replacement, that gives us more opportunities to, scheme better with the other guys. And of course, with Coach Saban knowing this, it's not an injury, but knowing the suspension's been there, he's certainly been planning around this. So it will be really interesting to see how we stop them up front. We have to be able to get the run game going, and I think Deontay Brown being out for Alabama is going to be really tough for us for the run game. I'm not sure how we're going to move to the left guard. Of course, Lester Cotton is our regular starter. I read somewhere that Matt Womack was getting some starters reps in at guard. I don't know if it was left or right guard. We might see some movement on that offensive line. But no matter what we do, we got to be able to dominate that first line of attack with that offensive line. And we've been able to do it with most teams in the season. However, the teams that have given Alabama, I wouldn't say trouble, but the teams that have played us the best have had dominant defensive lines, or at the very least, dominant defensive linemen. And that's really, like, for example, Mississippi State, that was probably the best example I can give you with Montez Sweat. He just tore us up, and Tua had a rough game there. So hopefully we'll be able to just, go and hit him in the mouth early on the line. But we're just going to have to wait and see there. It'll be interesting to see, like I said, how we scheme around it. And of course, one thing that Tua doesn't get enough credit for is being able to call out stuff. So if it's, an outside blitz or something, he'll likely be able to pick that up and be able to make the play there and know where to get the ball out and when to get it there. But when it's defensive linemen that they're just coming every single play, that really makes it tough to see, to stop, just because they're just getting beat and you just don't have time to make those plays. Of course, we'll have plenty of stuff in our arsenal to get the ball out quick to our speedy guys, but we'll just have to see what happens there. Okay, and another thing with it is just handling pressure, but our defensive line versus their offensive line, when you flip the battle of the trenches, we need to be able to get pressure on them. So the way we've been able to handle most teams is by getting a lot of coverage sacks. That's a sack where you're not blitzing, you're just sending your 3 or 4 guys you always send, put everyone else out in coverage, and you're still getting sacks. That gives you the benefit of having more guys in coverage, which we're definitely going to need against this receiving core. But you also are getting the pressure just from that D-line. Of course, it starts with Quinnen Williams. That guy is an absolute monster. We've been talking about him most of the season. And he's going to need to have one of those big games. I will say, although our defensive line is pretty comparable to theirs, you can debate which one's better. I think our offensive line is undoubtedly better than their offensive line. And it gives me hope that we were able to do so much against Oklahoma's offensive line and Kyler Murray, who's more mobile than Lawrence, because the offensive line is going to be worse. Oklahoma's offensive line, it got the trophy for the best offensive line in the nation. So the fact that we were able to do so much there, especially with Quinnen Williams in the middle, and then get to a more mobile quarterback and just pressure him and frustrate him, that stuff matters. And when we were able to do that against Oklahoma, that should be able to translate to Clemson. So, like I said, we're going to have to wait and see how it plays out. But I think that will be in our favor. I think we are going to be able to get some coverage pressure there. But another thing is we don't know about Christian Miller yet. So if Christian Miller is out for this game, that's going to be harder for us to get pressure. It depends on who fills in his spot. We've seen some people move to outside linebacker, like Dylan Moses. We've seen him move in practice. I don't know if that's going to stick or if that's just a momentary thing. We saw Jamie Mosley step in for him. A lot of people are expecting Yabi Anoma to play in this game and step up. However, I'm not really sure if that's going to happen. And that's just more speculation than anything else. We have a lot of guys, but when it's the biggest game of your entire life, you have to be able to, bring your absolute best. So you really can't roll the dice unless you know it's going to work. And I trust our coaching staff to figure out what's the best if Christian Miller isn't available, or even if he's not 100%, which I doubt he will be at this point. But we just don't know. Of course, he's listed as questionable, and we're just going to have to, hope for the best, wait and see. But that's going to be a tough one to watch. If Christian Miller doesn't play, I think whoever subs in his place, if that guy's able to get some pressures off the line, then that's going to be huge for us. Or even if he's dropping back in coverage and we're just pressuring with 3, depending on how we scheme it. Just getting the defensive line to frustrate their O-line and to get to Lawrence as early and as often as humanly possible. That's how we did it against Oklahoma. That's how we've done it most of the season. But we're going to have to be on another level to stop Lawrence, because I will say, even though he is a freshman, he might be he's definitely one of the best quarterbacks in the nation. But when everything is said and done, when all of the people in college football right now, when their careers are over, he might have the best numbers out of all of them. It's hard to picture it with just his freshman year, but I'm really high on Trevor Lawrence. I really think he's just an absolute phenom. And, you can make fun of his hairstyle all you want, and he hasn't been 100% in games yet, but his ceiling is higher than just about anybody's in college football right now. And I honestly think if he could declare for the NFL draft right now, he would be QB1 in my eyes. And that is saying something coming from a freshman. The fact that we're going to have to deal with him not only in this game, but probably in the next 2 years in some capacity. It's going to be tough, but we just got to worry about this game. And like I said, if you can just do stuff to frustrate him, like getting those pressures. And the biggest thing is with their wide receivers being so good, we need to be able to put as many people in coverage as we can. But if we can't get pressure on him, if we give him too much time, he's going to find the open man, and you can't keep him covered forever. So we either have to, if we can't get coverage pressure, coverage sacks, then we either have to bring people out of coverage to come pressure him, or just live with the result, which we can't do that either. So the ideal scenario for us is to be able to get sacks with Quinn Williams, Buggs, and Davis, and hopefully Miller if he's healthy, without having to bring in, Moses or Mack or people off the edge in the corner or the flat to make those plays. If we can keep those people in coverage, that's really going to help us out, because this is going to be the fastest game of Lawrence's life, and you're going to see the maturity of him in this game, and we haven't really had to see it yet. And things are going to have to happen off the seat of his pants. So if we can just speed that game up for him and speed up that mental clock and give him, 1.5 or 2 seconds to get the ball out as opposed to normal 3, 4, 5 seconds, those are the things that are going to matter. And that's really going to frustrate him early. And like I said, if we don't do that, then they're going to score touchdowns with their receiving core. Of course, Alabama has learned from having to deal with Renfro the past few years. This is the last time we'll ever have to see him, thank God. And they also have Justin Ross, the freshman, and T. Higgins. They're really talented all over that receiving core. And they're going to find a mismatch somewhere, and they're going to have good plays because Dabo's going to be able to play it up really well. But if we can get pressure early, we don't give them enough time to get through their routes, that's really something that'll help us out. But that's enough about the interior. I think here's another way to look at, like I said, when our defensive lines are comparable, but our offensive line's better, so I feel better about that. The same thing can be said on the edge. I believe that the wide receivers on each team are pretty comparable. Of course, we might have the best receiving core in the nation, but Clemson has a lot of guys who are going to go, make money on Sundays, and they're relatively comparable. Of course, I think we have more depth, but you don't really need depth for one game. You just need to make plays for 60 minutes. So if there's not an injury, that doesn't matter as much, as long as someone's balling out, which there will be. But that being said, I like our secondary a lot more than I like Clemson's secondary. I think that Clemson has gotten exposed, especially when they've had to face other SEC quarterbacks, for example. Like they had to face Jake Bentley and Kellen Mond this year. Both of them just absolutely tore up that secondary, and they have nothing on what Tua can do. And I believe Tua is going to be completely healthy. There's no reason to believe he won't be at this point if he was able to play all the Oklahoma game, unless something happens in the game. And even if not, Jalen's going to be able to bring up a changeup every now and then with his running ability if he gets in. But anyway, I think that, it's pretty comparable, our receivers versus their receivers. What you can't compare and be pretty close is who has the edge when you line up against each other. And I think I like to put our receivers against their DBs and our DBs against their receivers. I think we win that battle more, especially when you think about who's going to be throwing on the ball. I mean, if you have, any space whatsoever, Tua is going to get you that ball. And we're just going to have to see what happens. But it'll be really good to see for us if we can make it happen. And our receivers getting open, especially if we can do it early. Another thing about this game is just going to be setting that tone early, but we're going to have to wait and see. Another big X factor, and this is what gives Alabama the edge in literally any possible game you can fathom in college football, and that's the coaching battle. I think Dabo Swinney is right now the second best college football head coach, but we got the best, and we're always going to have the best as long as Nick Saban is on the sideline. And as soon as he goes off the sideline, Dabo is going to be coming to Alabama anyways. But I think that if you give them each coach the same amount of time, Nick Saban's going to be able to just do more. And that's not a knock on Dabo. All of these things are picking hairs so much. You're picking literally like who is the best in the nation and who is the second best in the nation. We're not talking about we were with Oklahoma with this gaping hole in their defense or anything. Clemson is great at everything, and Alabama is great at everything. We're just a little bit greater here and there, and I think that's what's going to matter. And I think that's what's going to help with Nick Saban. If something's going wrong, Nick Saban's going to be able to make that adjustment. He's proven that in championship games before. And we'll just have to see. And then two more X factors. The ability to establish a solid run game is absolutely crucial in this game because we need to be able to keep them off their toes and have them stack the box so we can further exploit the secondary. If they're worrying more about the edge and we can't get Jacobs, Najee, or Damian to get those attempts and get those yards, then it's going to be a really long day, and we're going to have to just put the entire game onto his shoulders, which he can do it, but that's not ideal at all. Well, the ideal scenario for Alabama is if at least one of our running backs, more likely than not either Jacobs or Najee Harris, to just absolutely destroy them on offense and just eat them up every single time like Jacobs did in the Oklahoma game or like Najee Harris did in last year's national championship game. So either way, you're going to have some running back just make play after play, get 5 or 6, 7 yards a carry, and occasionally bust one out for a 20, 30 yard gain. If we can get that done, keep them honest in the linebackers stacking the box, and open up those passing lanes on the edge, then I think we got them beat. Of course, that's easier said than done because a big thing about stopping a run game is how good is your D-line, and Clemson has one of the best, if not the best D-lines in the country. So we'll just have to wait and see how it works out. But I'm going to be looking forward to that, and I like our advantage there just because Jacobs is absolutely peaking right now, and this is probably going to be his last game in Alabama uniform, so I'm glad he's peaking. And Najee hasn't peaked yet, but he's proven that if you need yards, he will get them for you. Just look at any time he's played in a clutch game, whether it's the games this year or the national championship last year. That was pretty much going pretty cold because he didn't get a lot of looks during the season, and he hasn't gotten that many this year. But when he's out there, he will make a play. And that actually transitions to the final X factor of this game, and it's who can make a big play. So if you look a few years ago, the first game, Kenyon Drake scoring the kickoff return touchdown and us recovering the onside kick. If we don't make either of those two plays, we lose that game, plain and simple. That's two plays that won the game for us. Now, you look at the year we lost, there's a few things that you could have done here and there, but the big thing is obviously like the last offensive play for Clemson where they scored the touchdown on the illegal pick. If that play doesn't happen or if we get stopped there, we might win that game. If we can force one turnover, we win the game. It's a one-possession game at the end of the game. Those types of environments, one play makes the difference. And even though the last time we beat them, I believe it was 24-6 or 24-7, you had such a big lead in terms of points, but when you look at the game, it was so close. If we don't get the pick six by Mack Wilson, and if we don't get that turnover by Deron Payne and score that touchdown with him, we lose. I wouldn't say we lose the game, but we're back to a one possession game. So you can pick out one or two plays every time we play Clemson, and that determines who wins, who makes those plays. And so when you ask yourself who's going to make those plays, it could be Jalen Waddle on a punt return. It could be Jacobs on a kickoff return. It could be Ross or Higgins for Clemson busting out the huge play with the deep ball. It could be, Devontae Smith or Judy or Ruggs on our team. Like, there's so many playmakers that this might just be an absolute shootout anyways, and it'll just be whoever has the ball last. But when you want to figure out who is going to make that last play, you can just pretty much point to a name on the depth chart and you will find someone who can make it happen. I like us a little bit more in that category just because I like our return game in special teams. I don't really like our kicking or punting game at all, but I do feel confident in the fact that if they let Waddle get a return, he's going to get it for at least, 5 to 15, 20 yards. And if Jacobs takes one out of the end zone, he's proven already that he can score touchdowns there. And so those are things that, in a big game, you guys step up, and you can't ask for much more than the way Alabama stepped up at least 2 of the past 3 years. So it'll be interesting, and I'm really looking forward to watching it. I'm trying not to get too stressed about it, but we'll just have to wait and see. And also, once we get back to a normal routine, we're definitely going to be talking more about this season in review. But a question I have for y'all, if you could leave it in an iTunes review or even just message me on Twitter at Dorm Squad Sports, or just leave a comment if you're watching this on YouTube. If you could let me know, would you like us to transition more to an Alabama basketball podcast during basketball season, or would you like us to stick with football and stick with the NFL draft and the recruiting trail and spring training? Because there's so much to talk about either way. Or we could even open up to, baseball, softball, gymnastics, all the other sports, because Alabama's great at all of it. We can try to combine it all. But we're really here to make sure we're doing what y'all want us to do. And whatever that is, we'll make it happen. So make sure y'all are letting us know what type of stuff you want to be listening to, because that's what we're going to put out at the end of the day. All right, one last thing before we wrap it up. I'm going to talk about the Alabama-Kentucky game real quick. Just some things that I noticed while watching the game. I had a family event. I wasn't able to be in attendance. But I think what it really proved is, first off, how hard it is to win on the road in SEC games. But most importantly, what can happen when Coleman Coliseum gets loud. Calipari said he wasn't expecting that hostile of an environment. But you could tell, even on TV, just how crazy that crowd was. And that's something that has to happen in all of our big games this year. But one issue that I have is with Alabama basketball is we still don't have that guy. Last year we had to make a shot to win the game, and Colin Sexton, every person knew Colin Sexton was getting that ball, and he made the shot. But every big win we've had this year, we change who the big player is. For example, we've had Alex Reese do it in one game. We had Tevin Mack do it against Kentucky. Of course, Kyra Lewis is always getting enough points, and sometimes he's really balled out. We had Dante Hall do it earlier in the year. We've had Riley Norris do it against SF Austin. And sooner or later, John Petty's going to do it, or Dazon, or literally anybody. But you need to have that guy, and I just don't think we have that guy right now. And it'll be interesting to see what happens as the year progresses and we get more into conference play. But the one thing that Alabama fans in basketball need to be focusing on is, does Alabama have that guy? And of course, it's a lot to put on Kyra Lewis's shoulders, but I think he has to be the guy. He is averaging the most in points right now, and also he's a point guard, so he's trying to facilitate the offense as well. He's not getting enough shots at the free throw line, which should progress as he becomes to be more comfortable attacking in the paint. But it's still a long season ahead. But there's plenty of stuff to look forward to with Alabama basketball. Of course, we're just one game into SEC conference or SEC play, and it'll be a fun season. And after that win, I'm more confident that Alabama has a chance to make the tournament. Before we went on this 5-game win streak, I was a little nervous, honestly. But everything seems to be pointing in the right direction for Alabama basketball. and it's been pointing in the right direction for Alabama football. Also, a shout out to women's basketball. They had a loss today against South Carolina, but South Carolina is one of the best teams in the country, and the women fought tooth and nail to the last play, and they almost won it. So congratulations for them on a hard-fought game, even though it turned out in a loss. I know Alabama's not about moral victories, but there's a lot of good things you could take from that game moving forward. But anyway, I think that's enough for this podcast. Make sure, again, if you could just subscribe wherever you're listening to this, follow us on Twitter. Just keep in touch with us. We love it when you ask us questions or send us stuff, or just, even if you're just liking or retweeting our posts on Twitter, when we say, dumb jokes about Alabama, like whatever you want to do, just make sure you keep in touch with us. We love it when you get involved. And with all that being said, it's been a while since I've been able to say this, but make sure you have a happy week, and most importantly, have a happy game day. Thank you all so much for listening, and roll Tide.